already with us. So I want to say welcome from the Office for Public Engagement. My name is Mary Benasuti, and with me is Amber Cameron and Katarina Kent from the Office for Public Engagement. And this is the first in a place-based webinar series. So the University of Minnesota has a long history of place-based community engagement. Maybe you know about this, as well as community engaged scholarship. This is an approach that aims to address the social, economic, and environmental issues on a local level. Place-based engagement allows us to build long-term partnerships, and it's a powerful way to address challenges with what I think can be significant results. So today we're launching this first webinar in our series called Place Matters to showcase some of the university's many place-based projects, and it also in order to share some of the challenges and benefits of this work. So today's webinar will focus on mapping engagement, and we'll hear from Tasoulla Hadjiyanni from the College of Design, who will share the Landscapes of Hope project, as well as Ryan Mattke from the libraries, who will share the Mapping Prejudice project. Jeff Matson from CURA, the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs, who will highlight community assets in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood. And Tom Fisher from the Metropolitan Design Center, who will share a project titled Risk Horizons, Mapping Challenge and Opportunity Around the World. And last but not least, we'll hear from Len Kne from U-Spatial, who will share some mapping resources and support information. So we ask that you please use the Q&A function for your questions, and we'll hold them till all the speakers have had a chance to share their presentations. All right, well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tasoulla. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Mary. I can share my screen. So let me see.
There we go.
Because it's not. Do you see the whole slide, or do you see?
We see your screen.
Yeah, it's just a second, because I'm not showing. It's not showing up as slide view.
There you go, Tasoulla. That's the slide.
Do you see the actual slide?
Yep, we just see the one slide. Yes.
Oh, all right. I see something different. So I'm assuming it's working okay then if you can see just one slide, right?
Yes.
Okay, let's try that. With inviting me to share Landscapes of Hope with you, and I would like to start with a disclaimer that when the Twin Cities of Minnesota became the global epicenter for social and racial justice following the murder of George Floyd on May 25th, I actually found myself frozen. For much of my career, I saw myself as a storyteller. A story is the shortest distance between two people, they say. So I use my platform as a professor and I collect stories of people, thinking that through those stories, we can see the invisible impact of design and the built environment to shape our lives. Usually, these are the stories of people whose voices are often not heard, such as immigrants and minorities and refugees, victims of sex trafficking, and children with mental health challenges. The driver behind my work is my belief that design matters. It can be leveraged for innovation and change to create what I call culturally enriched communities. These are communities in which everyone can thrive. And yet in May, questions were weighing me down. Do I have the right to tell the stories of Black and Indigenous people? Do I overstep ethical boundaries by telling stories that are not mine? Under what circumstances can my personal experiences of injustice be used as a platform to engage with others who experience marginalization and inequality? How would my work as an outsider be judged by other scholars and the public, and would it even be taken seriously? What if I make a mistake, I misspeak, or I misrepresent the story, further perpetuating stereotypes? And where would I find the mental tenacity to handle the potential shaming that could follow? It's not only what we do that matters, also important is why we do what we do. I was 10 years old when Turkey invaded Cyprus and catapulted my family and myself into a life of refugeehood. So protests have been part of my life for a long time. And the last protest I attended was in 1996, where you can see a picture here. Solomon Solomon was shot when he climbed on a pole to bring down the Turkish flag, not very, literally just a couple of feet very close to me. As the helicopters were going overhead, we didn't know if we were gonna be shot next. So during the protest in May, with the helicopters above my house, because my house is only 12 blocks from where George Floyd was murdered, my post-traumatic stress disorder was through the roof, and I didn't know what I was doing and whether I should be doing anything at all. At the same time, I knew that many of the businesses that were impacted through the protests were in the neighborhoods that I was frequenting for my research, right? So Franklin Avenue, Lyndale Avenue, Lake Street were all BIPOC, diverse neighborhoods that were the center of my research all of these years. Many of these businesses were Black-owned, immigrant-owned, refugee-owned, women-owned, family-owned businesses. So I knew that the answers that we were looking for in terms of how to pave the way for social and racial justice were right in front of our eyes if we know where to look. And so I decided to renew my vows to my work and continue doing what I knew how to do. So I decided that I should be broadening what I see and look at the middle, see where I'm standing, see what I'm stepping on, challenge my assumptions and my perceptions. I also decided to find others who share the same vision, and this way build synergies and find support. So that's another reason why the Office for Public Engagement is so important in my work and in keeping me going. I also decided that it's okay, I'm gonna be more intentional in taking chances, even if I get wet, because it's so important for me to leave my marking so others can follow. And that's why I continued and created Landscapes of Hope. Landscapes of Hope is a digital map with over 200 stories of buildings impacted by the Twin Cities protest. You can find the map on www.cc-design.com/Landscapes of Hope. The thing with Landscapes of Hope is that it's using mapping as a tool for understanding and changing the city, because it gives us that bird's eye view so we can see where areas of our cities open up opportunities for investment and for connections to happen. Landscapes of Hope didn't start out as a map. When I started in May, it was entries like the one that you see here. And each of the entries focuses on explaining how that particular building or business or organization contributes to paving the way for social and racial justice. Like, for example, the one that you can see here, it talks about how the school contributes to eliminating educational disparities by serving youth who are a little bit different, so they don't fit in a standard school system. Every time an entry was posted on the website, we would reach out to the business and notify them that we share their story through this platform. And here you can see the response that we get that says, "Thank you so much for this well-written piece and for sharing it with us. We will share it as news from our site and are grateful for the community coming together and sharing important stories right now, we would change the world this way. I also want to thank the Global Programs and Strategy Alliance, because they were the ones that gave us the funding to actually hire U-Spatial and transform these little separate entries into the map that you see today. That wouldn't have happened without that grant and without U-Spatial. So the beauty of the map is that it allows us to include search function. So the first search function is that you can search by building type. So this way, advocates for paving the way for social and racial justice can search and find design-related interventions for different building types, from homes to retail to restaurants, parks, and streets. We also have a search button by neighborhood, because we wanted to give visibility to the neighborhoods and enable advocates to come together and share the stories of their neighborhood and the struggles of their neighborhoods in getting funding to rebuild, et cetera, and talking about the neighborhood's resilience that way. And as you can see, it varies from Minneapolis to St. Paul, all across the Twin Cities. I also want to share with you that when we started, the resource started as Landscapes of Agony. Agony is one of the 52,803 words in the English language that are actually Greek. And it is a powerful word because it captures the pain that people in Minneapolis and St. Paul and in those neighborhoods were feeling at that time. And as we saw, that pain spread through the world and became global. So when I started out, I called it Landscapes of Agony. And many of the images were the ones that you see here, the buildings that burned, the windows that were shattered, partly because fire-resistant buildings are important in architecture. Windows that shouldn't be shattered and protecting property is also important. So I was trying to get designers and architects to be thinking about those safety issues. What I've learned through the conversations that ensued is that such language was distracting from the message. So it's very important in this work that we do that we bring together and rethink our language that we use to foster togetherness and to bring people together instead of dilute our message. So I changed it to Landscapes of Hope. Landscapes of Hope inspired classes and courses in other schools, including Iowa State University, who are using the resource to create a similar resource of their own. And it also inspired a few media pieces, which again, I think helps raise awareness about environmental design research and the university's connections to the community and what we bring and what we offer and why design and the built environment are relevant to the development of our city. And I want to close with saying that our work is slow, as we know in public engagement, and I'm hoping that we all embrace this slow work, even if it feels like we're moving around in circles, and move toward what I call consider culture, moving away from cancel culture toward consider culture, where we stop and we think and we reflect and we pay attention to, for example, how the built environment can be used to eliminate health, income, and educational disparities and create communities in which everyone can thrive. I leave you with an invitation to sign up for the Culturally Enriched Communities newsletters by going to the Culturally Enriched Communities website, cec-design.com. Thank you.
Tasoulla, thank you so much. We so appreciate all your good work.
Thank you.
And now we're going to turn it over to Ryan. And Ryan's going to talk with us about the Mapping Prejudice project.
Excellent. You can see the slides?
Yes, thanks.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you, Tasoulla, for that. That's a great presentation and a wonderful project. So my name is Ryan Mattke. I'm the Map and Geospatial Information Librarian here at the University of Minnesota, and I am also the co-director and one of the co-founders of the Mapping Prejudice project. So at this moment, even more so now than over the past year, the eyes of the world are on the Twin Cities. I mean, I don't need to tell any of you that we became the center of international scrutiny almost 1 year ago on May 25th, when George Floyd was murdered by Minneapolis police. And from this corner of 38th in Chicago, demonstrations and civil unrest spread around the city and around the world. In the first month after Floyd's death, 20 million Americans joined public demonstrations for Black Lives Matter. Scholars are now calling this the largest protest movement in American history. During the initial weeks of that uprising, Mapping Prejudice was contacted by people around the world who wanted to know why this started here. I think that our community will be grappling with that question for years to come, and I would never suggest that there is a single answer, but our team has been able to provide one way into the larger conversation that we need to have as a community. We've been working with people in the Twin Cities to understand the legacies of racial covenants. These are clauses that are inserted into property deeds to keep people who are not white from buying or occupying homes. These clauses were composed and promoted by realtors, city planners, bankers, and elected officials for much of the 20th century. They work in concert with other practices like white violence, real estate steering, and redlining to keep people who are not white from owning land and homes. Now, the Fair Housing Act of 1968 made all of these practices illegal. And once this happened, there was a rush to forget, at least largely among white people. Our project is working to peel back this willful amnesia and to empower communities to engage in collective remembering. We're trying to create data that can help communities of color demand change. Transformational change is necessary because we're facing a crisis at least 100 years in the making. The Twin Cities have some of the highest racial disparities in the country. And I'm going to highlight just one important number in what is a litany of statistics. So the Twin Cities has the highest gap between Black and white homeownership rates for any major metropolitan area in the country. 75% of white families own their homes, 25% of Black families can make that same claim. So this homeownership gap undergirds a whole raft of racial disparities that afflict our community, and housing sits often at the foundation of everything else. It can determine whether you're going to be healthy or sick, access to education, whether you'll be able to amass any kind of wealth. Since our inception as a project, our team has been focused on a question, which is, how did we get here? Again, there's many answers to that question, but our project highlights a critical watershed for our community and many others. And that was the decision to use private contracts to reserve huge swaths of land for the exclusive use of white people. In reality, this practice started in the territorial period for the state. Land was seized by the federal government in the 19th century through a series of treaties whose promises were not honored. And then racial covenants built further on that foundation. They were used to ensure that land taken from indigenous people could only be owned or occupied by individuals who were perceived to be white. So I'm going to pause for a definition here. Racial covenants are clauses that are inserted into property deeds specifically. Here in the Twin Cities, real estate developers started using racial covenants in about 1910. And this is the first deed with this kind of restriction. So these clauses were attached to new land they were developing to keep people who are not white from buying or even occupying homes. And the language varies, but it's always racist. So I'm going to read you some additional examples, but I will forewarn you that the language is disturbing. This one says, no persons of any race other than the Aryan race shall use or occupy any building or any lot. That one's from 1946, by the way. No person of any race other than the Caucasian race shall use or occupy any building or any lot, except that this covenant shall not prevent occupancy by domestic servants of a different race. And said premises shall not at any time be sold, conveyed, leased, or sublet, or occupied by any person or persons who are not full bloods of the so-called Caucasian or white race. And it's painful to hear these words, but I'm reading them because we want to bear witness to this practice. I want white people to confront this racism and to acknowledge that it was intentional. Today, many white people are shocked by racial covenants. I can understand this reaction, but I want to emphasize that there was nothing secret about the restrictions when they were in use. Racial covenants were printed in newspaper ads for new housing developments. They featured in the plot lines of books, plays, and movies. They were the subject of countless studies and news reports. Stories about covenants have been passed down through Black, Asian, Jewish, Native American families for generations. But even with this rich record of memoirs and narratives and activism, there's a lot we don't know about these restrictions. For instance, on the whole, what do the covenants say? Where were they used? How common were they? How much land did they cover exactly? We decided to answer these questions in a somewhat unconventional way. We started here in Hennepin County, where we found that we could get digital images of county property records. And this allowed us to use computers to comb through millions of records to flag the documents that seemed to have racist language. And then we harnessed the power of community. Our project started figuring out how to lead people of all ages and backgrounds in the work of mapping these restrictions. For our Hennepin County map, over 3,000 volunteers read 177,000 historical property deeds. They found 24,000 property parcels that have racial covenants. And when we put this information on a map, this is what we got. What you see here is a conglomeration of blue dots. Each dot denotes an individual property parcel that was reserved exclusively for the use of white people. All this blue illuminates the nearly 24,000 property parcels we've identified with racial covenants. So looking at this close-up of a neighborhood in South Minneapolis, you can see each individual restricted property. No one has ever created a comprehensive map of this kind before in any American city. And as we have built it in collaboration with the community, we've discovered it to be a powerful platform for policymaking, research, and community conversations. So what you see here is the spread of racial covenants throughout Hennepin County over time. So the text I read shows how these contracts were explicitly racist. This map shows you how widespread they were. But I also want you to understand how powerful they were. To fully grasp this, you have to know how they were enforced. They were backed up by the full power of the American judicial system. Covenants ran with the land, which meant that they could be enforced through the court system decades after they were embedded into the deeds. And anyone who breached a covenant, even after the property had changed hands several times, risked ending up in court. Anyone who sold covenanted land to a person who was not white risked losing the property altogether, as this would have been a violation of the original property contract. And the person who breached the covenant would lose everything. It could trigger a process that would put the property back in the hands of the person who wrote the original covenant. If that person was no longer alive, the property would revert to the heirs. So I'm often asked, why do this in a library? Why not an academic department or research center? For me, the answer is easy. It's that the library is inherently interdisciplinary. It's an intersectional hub that can bring together experts from different departments interested in the same topic. Libraries are also experienced in project management and networking. We're able to leverage our connections in various disciplines in order to bring people together. And that's what it took to launch and sustain this project. So a little bit on how we're doing this. For 1910 to 1960, which is the time period where covenants appear in Hennepin County, we had over 3 million pages of deed images encompassing over 1 million individual property deeds. Optical character recognition gave us a set of about 177,000 images from 38,000 property deeds. After the computer flags deeds it thinks contain racist language, we upload these documents to a crowdsourcing platform called Zooniverse. And then we put out a call to community members, asking them to read historical property deeds and extract the information we need to put these restrictions on a map. Since volunteers are manually transcribing information from historical documents, we needed a way to verify the data. And here we were assisted by a local group of altruistic coders who helped us develop a reliability score algorithm for our volunteers. And the actual mapping of the covenants is a combination of GIS work and old-fashioned map library detective work. If the property parcel still exists, the data was joined to the map easily. But if the parcel had been split or combined, now it happens to be under a shopping center or a freeway, we needed to locate historical maps to help us redraw those boundaries. I'd also like to give some context. One of the most painful truths about the covenants is that most white people thought they were necessary. Black people, by contrast, saw covenants as a threat to basic liberty. Here in the Twin Cities, we had leaders like Nellie Francis, Marvel Jackson, Lena Olive Smith, and Katie McWatt, and they devoted their lives to fighting these practices. All over the country, Black people put everything on the line to challenge the covenants. They bought houses with covenants, they moved into white neighborhoods. And thanks to these activists, covenants are illegal today. They brought their fight to the courts, mounting a legal challenge that ended up at the Supreme Court, which declared covenants to be unenforceable. They brought their fight to state legislatures and to Congress, which passed the Fair Housing Act in 1968. And despite these victories, we're still living with the legacies of this practice. So what do the covenants do? They transformed a relatively mixed city into a racially segregated city. Covenants legitimated harassment and violence against Black residents, who are often forced to retreat to Black enclaves for safety. Neighborhoods that were gated with covenants are still the whitest in Minneapolis today. And again, we know this was happening everywhere because in the 1930s, the federal government was making covenants a precondition for public underwriting of development in all communities. The neighborhoods that didn't have covenants were redlined. And that's the federal practice that declared neighborhoods that were racially mixed to be hazardous investments for lenders. This choked off capital to those areas. These two things, covenants and redlining, worked to make it really hard for people who were not white to buy homes. It made it really hard for people who are not white to find stable, affordable, and decent housing. And across the nation, Black people, in the words of Langston Hughes, were hemmed in, which is the title of a poem that he wrote in 1949. And it included these lines: "They've got covenants restricting me, hemmed in on the South Side, can't breathe free." More than 70 years later, Black people are still struggling for breath. "Please, please, I can't breathe." These were some of George Floyd's last words as he lay pinned under the knee of a police officer. And our map is meant to bring people together around a new understanding of the way that we have been divided. Mapping Prejudice is designed to help people see structural racism. When I say structural racism, I mean collective racial prejudice that is backed by legal authority and institutional control. Racial covenants are classic manifestations of structural racism. Racism is not just a matter of personal bias. It's not just the sentiments like these protesters who picketed the Minnesota state hearings on fair housing in 1962. Their placards make their bigotry plain. Mapping Prejudice is helping people look beyond the blatant racism to get people to see structures. We want people to see how racist ideology has been embedded into community institutions over decades. That racism has been literally written into the foundational documents of our communities. So what about today? One thing we're able to do is build maps like these, showing how demographic patterns today are linked to the housing practices of the past. Here you can see that though the city average today is 53% white, the covenanted areas are still 79% white. And these showing a direct connection between generational wealth and racist historical housing policies. Our research shows that today, more than 50 years after the Fair Housing Act, houses in Minneapolis that had covenants are worth 14% more than the median, while houses in redlined areas are worth 25% less. Examining this history helps us understand why it seems to be the same group of people who are vulnerable to housing insecurity. The system was built to keep Black and brown people from owning property. It was built to keep them from amassing wealth. And even recently, the killing of Dante Wright by Brooklyn Center Police was the latest in a series of traumas that have made it abundantly clear that we have to make change and address structural racism. What you see here is a preliminary sketch of a map we just started looking at. This puts two data sets in conversation, and that's racial covenants, and then a Star Tribune database of police officer related killings in Minnesota over the past 20 years. So what do we do now? We must repair the damage in our communities. The first step is to remember. That's what we're doing today. This is part of the process of reparations, which Ta-Nehisi Coates describes as the full acceptance of our collective biography and its consequences. So in our project, we often repeat the refrain that we are not policymakers, but we are helping people to see why this reparative work is urgent. And in essence, we are making a case for reparations. Mapping Prejudice is making this intervention in the civic arena. We're inviting community members to help us build these maps. People listen to the presentation, they look at our map, and then they read the deeds. They engage with the primary source materials. We're really asking community researchers to document the deliberate campaign to create an all-white landscape. And by engineering encounters between people and the past, we're promoting participants to confront the origins of our contemporary disparities. And in this way, we're building a foundation for the policy work that can make change in the future. And it's up to all of us to make sure that this awareness translates into action. We need to avoid the mistakes of the past. As Minneapolis City Council member Jeremiah Ellison has warned, during every crisis, well-meaning white people here make a ritual of acknowledging the city's steep inequities. And it's as if people think the mere acknowledgement is the work. Repair work will cost money, but we cannot afford to do nothing. None of us want to repeat the past. This history is meant to open up imaginative spaces that we can use to construct a better future. And as James Baldwin said, as long as you pretend you don't know your history, you're going to be a prisoner of it. So now that we are free, where are we going to go? You can learn more at mappingprejudice.umn.edu. And I will just say I'm only one of the team members for the project, and I want to be sure to acknowledge the other co-founders of the project here. Thank you.
Ryan, thank you so much. And Amber did put the URL in the chat for all of you. I do believe that the mapping, particularly the mapping of the racial covenants, does tell the story and is leading to a new understanding of racial injustice, and really appreciate all the work of you and your team. And thank you for sharing that today. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Matson from Cura. Jeff. Well, you're on mute.
I am. Thanks,
There
Mary.
you go. Yeah.
And good afternoon, everyone. Also wanted to say thanks to Ryan and Tasoulla. Those were two really incredible and important projects, and tie in with a lot of our work. So we're happy to be a part of this kind of same larger team. But I'm going to turn things to a little bit of a lighter subject and talk about Storymaps with you all. And hopefully the slideshow will get started. Are you seeing a single slide?
Yes.
Great.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to talk about a tool that we all have access to called Storymaps. I'm going to show you an example of one that we've created, and then talk a little bit about how they work and how you might be able to create your own. But first, just a little bit about Cura. Cura has been around for more than 50 years, 53 to be exact. And we help the university fulfill its engagement mission through a number of faculty and student-led research programs. We also provide technical assistance to the nonprofit community statewide through our community GIS program, our Resilient Communities program, and our neighborhood organizing and leadership training program. The mission of CGIS at Cura is to make information more accessible, to increase the capacity of community organizations, and to improve neighborhood conditions through data-based decision-making. Our work covers many different subject areas, including housing affordability, transportation and access, public safety, arts and the environment, and regional planning and studies of gentrification, just to name a few. But to turn to the topic at hand, this is an example of a story map. Actually, it's an image of a story map. I thought I would spare everyone the pain that can sometimes occur with a live demonstration. So instead, I'm just going to click through a series of images that show how you might interact with the story map. And then at the end, I'll provide a link so you can actually go out and look at this one yourself, as well as some other great examples of story maps. So unlike the previous set of project examples that I shared with you, which were just static maps that were created, at a point in time for one person or one project, this is an interactive map that lives on the web and combines traditional map features with images, text, videos, and links, really whatever you want to combine with what you might find in a traditional map format. You can zoom in and out on this map, move around, interact with the map by both clicking on the dots that you see on the map itself, or by clicking on the images or labels over on the left side of the map. This story map example is one that we created for the Cedar Riverside neighborhood, directly adjacent to the University of Minnesota, and also happens to be a community asset map, which we find to be a very effective use for story maps. The story map in this example is a tab-based theme called a shortlist, and you can click on any of the tabs across the top of the page to see the items in just that category. So in this case, if I click on the institution tab, the map suddenly changes, removes everything from the map that isn't in that institution category, and again shows both images on the left as well as the points on the map. Another nice feature of these story maps is as you zoom in, you can set them up so that they're only showing information features on the left side of the screen that are in your current view on the map. So as I zoomed in within the institution category, some of the features disappeared. The features that are in this area of the map do appear. If I click on one of these particular points on the map or on the left side of the page, it will zoom me in to that point and then provide whatever kind of additional info I've included in my story map. So in this case, I've got some images of a park. I've got a little bit of text about the history of that park and what its current functions and features are. And then I've also provided a link where people can go to find more information. Maybe the feature on your map has a website, has contact information, something else that you want to share with others. Another nice feature about these story maps is that if you're the owner of one of these, you can do editing and make changes to these right in your browser window. So since I'm the owner of this map, I have a little blue edit button up in the kind of the top center of my screen. And when I click on that, it allows me to make changes to these maps right in the browser window. So I can add additional points, additional features. I can reorganize the way my tabs are set up. I can edit any of the text, any of the images, any of the logos. Again, without the use or need for specialized mapping or GIS software. But again, just through clicking various places throughout the browser window. So in this case, I may want to reorder the tabs that I have across the top of my window. I might want to delete some of them or combine them. I can do that just through clicking the various settings in this window. I can also add additional features to the map that might help users with navigation. Maybe they want a locate button so that they can have the map automatically zoom to their location, or put a find window in the map so that you can type in an address and zoom to that location. And finally, even establish some bookmarks to help with navigation. So now that you've seen a very brief example of what a story map can do, I'm sure that you're all itching to make your own story map, and it really can be done in just a few simple steps. The most important, of course, is organizing all of your data. This is probably, as those of us who work in GIS and in mapping know, this is about where 90% of your work is going to take place. It took a lot of community effort and initiative to collect all those photos, to collect all of that text, all of those links. The placement of the dots on the map is quite trivial compared to all of the work that goes behind some of the other aspects of building a story map. So, while it may be easy to put together, it does require a lot of work on the back end to make something, kind of really as impressive as I feel like that Cedar Riverside map has been done. So you also want to ask yourself what kind of narrative or story you're trying to tell. What is it that you're trying to share with people? As I mentioned early on, and when I shared the link at the end, you'll see there are several different kind of templates and formats that these story maps can take place. And you want to make sure that you're kind of fitting the right one to the narrative that you're telling. The one that we used, again, this kind of tabbed list of features worked really well for us. Being a community asset map, because what was really important was capturing the categories and the individual locations of the places that were important to the Cedar Riverside community. And then you simply go through the steps to build your map, adding the text, the photos, the videos, the links, and then of course you want to be sure and share your map with others. There are a lot of great resources on the web for learning more about story maps. Storymaps.arcgis.com is where you get started to both look at other examples, to learn tips and tricks for how to build your own. They have some editor's picks of some of the top story maps that are the most popular ones out there on the web. And a lot of us gather a lot of our ideas just from looking at the examples, project examples that others have worked with, and modify those to kind of meet our own needs using our own data in our own local context. So I encourage you to check those out as well. a couple of links here if you want to go in and take a look at the Cedar Riverside story map on your own. Just go to z.umn.edu/CR story map. I can post that into the chat as soon as the presentation is over. And then, as I mentioned, storymaps.arcgis.com, another great resource for learning more about how to build these. And I would also encourage, if you're interested, to pay attention to Len's upcoming presentation. I'm sure he's going to talk about the fantastic trainings that U-Spatial offers, including a specific training that they offer on story maps. So with that, thank you. Realized I didn't take up all of my time, so I thought it was going to take a little bit longer to go through the story maps. So I guess we're ahead a little bit.
That's just fine. That's just fine, Jeff. Thank you so much for sharing. Story maps are a really useful tool, and we really appreciate you sharing a bit about them. I also know from my own work in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood that oftentimes the neighborhood isn't seen as, as a place with so many assets, and so the asset mapping is a great tool. So thank you. And now we will turn our attention to Tom Fisher. Tom.
Great, thank you, Mary. I'm going to share my screen here. So we just heard about story maps. I'm going to talk about another application of GIS, which is this idea of geo-design. This is an effort to use GIS and mapping to look toward the future, to develop possible future scenarios. And I was one of the co-founders of an international geodesign collaboration. You can see their website here, and I'd welcome everybody to go explore it. It's a collaboration among over 150 universities around the world. And here's a map of all of the members, and it's a continually growing number of institutions involved in doing geodesign work around a whole set of social, economic, environmental issues. And we agree every year to work on common projects. And so it's an opportunity for us to look at the impact of different public policies across nations, and as well to share strategies that might be of use. So I'm going to be talking about Risk Horizons, which is a project, a geodesign project that we are just starting here. But before I do, I just wanted to talk briefly about the International Geodesign Collaboration as another way to sort of understand geodesign as a possible tool. Here, I'll just, let's see, again, just a bit of the overview, the map of it. And our goal here is to actually influence public policy. And so we encourage all of our colleagues to be using what we discover as a way to influence policy. Here you can see the senior sort of all the co-founders and advisors, a list of all of the universities that are a part of this. And I think that there's also, I co-edited a book from Esri Press on the first year of this work. So if you're interested in that, it's a summary of all of the projects, as well as some broader conclusions that really are emerging out of all of this work put together in a book. You can also see on the website projects that we've done over the last several years. And you will see that there's a common format. And so one of the things we do is we look at a given scenario and then look at it in 2035 and in 2050. And we also have a sort of look at early adopters. So let's say there's a set of public policies that somebody, a city, a nation adopts in 2020, which was the sort of start date for this. What happens by 2050 if you're an early adopter, and then there's a late adopter scenario, which is that there's delay in adoption, and then a non-adopter scenario. We also use the Sustainable Development Goals as a kind of measure or metric for how we are doing. And part of the idea here is to show the opportunity costs of not acting. In other words, one of the things I think we see among public policymakers is a sense of, well, if we don't act now, you sort of kick the can down the road. And a lot of our work has been showing that by doing that, you actually increase costs, make long-term impacts much worse. And in some cases, they're almost devastating. The project that was done last year looking at Egypt's allowance of informal settlements on its agricultural land suggested that by 2050, if they didn't act, essentially Egypt would lose almost all of its agricultural land. And so there is an example of how geodesign can start to influence policy decisions and show why not acting really has huge consequences potentially. The other project that we're doing this year is we're partnering with Davos and the United Nations on a Trillion Trees project. And so all of the universities involved in this are looking at what happens around carbon sequestration, what kind of reforestation is appropriate in their locations. And of course, as you can see in maps like this, not every part of the world can really engage in a lot of reforestation. And so we're looking at these projects. We're currently doing a project in Minneapolis looking at the reforestation of former industrial lands. And so that will be our contribution. I thought I'd just share before I move on to risk horizons to just show you the project we did last year, which actually was, we won sort of the audience award for best project. What we did is we looked at the impact of a Green New Deal if it would be adopted in Minneapolis. So we looked at North and Northeast Minneapolis. We documented sort of zoning and land use issues, employment issues. There were a whole series of issues that we mapped, and then we looked at what would happen if there was an early adoption of the Green New Deal in 2020, how it would affect the northern part of Minneapolis by 2035 and then by 2050. And we then also did a late adopter scenario showing that while there would still be some benefits, there were actually some significant costs in delaying the adoption of some sort of Green New Deal like policies. And then finally, what happens if it was not adopted? And it ends up being a quite expensive and somewhat depressing scenario of what could possibly happen. We also were looking at environmental refugees coming here. And so the combination of the stress of climate change, of environmental refugees on the city's economy were part of what we looked at. We also did a kind of analysis of the Sustainable Development Goals and how they overlaid the Green New Deal goals. And so we developed a kind of matrix that looked at how those two policy initiatives, one at the national level and what the global level interact, and how they could reinforce each other. So that gives you a sense of how the IGC, as we call it, organizes our work and then shares our work globally. So it's been a tremendous use of geodesign as a tool and has really brought together universities, many of whom have never worked together before, around common issues. So, and that is really the basis then for the Risk Horizons project that I want to talk about, which is an effort that several of us have been involved in now for almost a year. Whoop, let me go back here. And the idea really began with the notion of how might we get ahead of the next pandemic? How might we start to anticipate where those sort of effects might occur? And could we use geodesign methods to begin to develop a predictive tool that would enable us to sort of understand where these stress points are, where these hotspots are globally, and begin to get ahead of it. So a group of us that's included Len, who will be joining me here in talking about this, as well as Steve Matson and Katie Pelican and Amy Kirscher and Karen Brown and Kate Kent has been involved. And I'm probably missing some others. Carolyn Porta from Public Health, a number of faculty and staff have really been working on essentially the idea of developing a global map that would look at hotspots. So we went beyond the idea of just the pandemic to really look at where are the global hotspots around a number of issues, around water, around food scarcity, around economic or political instability. And the notion here is to take advantage of the range of disciplines we have at the University of Minnesota to begin to map how different disciplines view hotspots, where they would place them. And so the notion here is that we develop a kind of interdisciplinary predictive tool that would be looking out ahead and seeing where there are sort of concentrations of concern from various disciplinary points of view. We actually at one point thought it was of Minnesota, and I realized, Len, that I'm not showing the current site. We actually at one point thought we'd just focus where we'd start on Minnesota, although some of the feedback that we got was that a lot of these issues are really global and that our faculty are really working at a global scale, and that we shouldn't just limit it initially to Minnesota. And so what we're going to do, we're in the sort of beta testing of this right now. In fact, the Water Circles group that have been meeting are going to be beta testing this survey in the next few weeks. But the idea would be that this would be sent out to all faculty, students, and staff of the university, asking what transformative change do you predict over the next decade from your disciplinary point of view? And then where do you see this change taking place in the world, along with a mapping tool? So the idea would be to ask people to map as best they can where these issues are of greatest concern to them. And we recognize, of course, that there are some issues that are hard to map. I mean, sea level rise would be essentially every seacoast on the planet. So it's but we recognize as well that there are issues that are more concentrated. And so we're looking at disciplinary overlap, where those places are and where we need to focus our attention. We think this could also be a great research tool for us to sort of connect disciplines who are concerned about particular places and use geography as the kind of interdisciplinary connection. And we also want to connect it to Sustainable Development Goals. So we ask those who are responding to the survey to list all of the SDGs that they think are appropriate for their concern. And then we just ask some, basic information about who they are. Len, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. I can stop sharing here. And Len has been really a key player in developing this and getting the survey going. And so I wanted to thank you in particular for all the work you've done.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, and as well as the staff of U-Spatial. We've all been putting a lot of work into it and the larger group. So no, I don't have anything to add. I did just chat out the link to the survey and encourage people on this webinar, if you're interested in trying it out, please do. We're in this beta phase of asking this question. We realize it's a hard question to answer, but this is in two ways. It's hard for you maybe to come up with an answer, but it's also hard and difficult questions to be thinking about. But to think about where issues are happening, positive and negative throughout the world, and thinking about where, right? I'm geographer, so we're thinking about where, and that's our spin on it. So
Yeah, and I think our hope is that the University of Minnesota could maintain this as a dynamic mapping effort, that we would be continually revisiting it, updating it. And we think it has great potential to sort of take advantage of our disciplinary breadth and our spatial grounding. I mean, a lot of what Len and I and others have talked about is the University of Minnesota as a spatial university. And what does it mean when we begin to understand all of our disciplines spatially in the same way that we understand our disciplines temporally when we know our own history? Well, what are the spatial implications of what we're doing?
Tom, thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Mhm.
Thank you for presenting and adding to our discussion today about mapping and Len, thank you as well. I'm going to turn it over to you now, Len. We've heard about a lot of amazing work and the different ways people are using mapping, and maybe you could share with us some resources.
Thanks, Mary. And you're seeing a U-Spatial logo?
Yes.
All right. And now seeing a gallery.
Yes.
Great. All right. Just checking Zoom. Thanks everybody for inviting me, and glad to be here. Shifting gears a little bit and talking about U-Spatial and talking about maybe some of the technologies that allow you to put maps together like we've seen from all the presenters here in the last hour. So real quickly, U-Spatial, we're part of research computing, and our mission is to help students, faculty, and staff make great maps, to tell stories with maps, and to perform spatial analysis and remote sensing using maps. I guess we like maps a lot, right? We're a group of about 14 staff and students. We've got labs on the Twin Cities and Duluth campus, and we work with colleagues throughout the university, right? Specifically a lot within the map library, CLA, Enterprise, GIS, and really all the experts across the university. Our mission at U-Spatial is to try and get us to, as Tom said, to be the spatial university. So we've seen some great examples of different types of maps and story maps from our presenters here today. And I wanted to start out by just showing a gallery of other maps and apps that are being created by students, faculty, and staff at the University of Minnesota. All of these that we're showing here, starting out with diverse farms, diverse foods. If I click into that, and I realize I just clicked into the wrong link here. And this is why Jeff is the smart one to do all his slides within. All right, we are going to jump back to slides quick. Seriously. All right. This is going to be an interesting presentation today. So lots of different maps are being created by students, faculty, and staff, right? We've got farming, we've got predominant religions, major empires, sustainability features, Eastman Tunnel collapse, the Mediterranean, looking at houses of worship, patterns of removal, history of Canal Park. The list goes on, and these are all being created again by our colleagues at the university. I was going to try one more here, see if you have any better luck. This one's called A Better Way to Get There. And it looks like that's going to work for us. This map created by Alicia Alloway. It's another version of a story map. Thought it was going to load for me here. Maybe we'll come back to that. It's hard to pitch and make the technology look good when it's not working for you today. Lots and lots of different maps that you can create. And this is where we are today. As of yesterday, we had 15,856 students, faculty, and staff using Arcgis Online. right? You can look at the slope of this curve. It's taking off. We're growing exponentially every year with the number of our colleagues who are creating maps and doing amazing work with this. Quick summary.
Len, can I jump in for 1 second? This is Amber.
Yeah,
if you want, it appears that it's working on my computer. I could pull it up and you could navigate me, but if that's hard, don't do that. But just thought I would offer it up. Yep.
Thank you. I see it finally loaded on mine. I'll jump back to it. Actually, let's take a look at it. So here's an example of a story map, different type of a template than what Jeff had shown, but this one's looking at a better way to get here. Alicia Alloway is the author of this. And again, I like to think of them as, a long form New York Times article. And this is a template that's relatively easy to use. Like a lot of, design work, it's the content, the data that takes a lot of work. And again, it's storytelling with maps, right? We can interact with this map and zoom in and look in this case, transit routes, as well as clusters of services that are within areas. And so if you take that map that Alicia did and you start adding it up with everything else that other folks have done, in the last 60 days, 857 contributors have created more than 8,000 maps and data sets. Hard to see in the bottom hand corner here, but there's the locations of where people are working. Again, this is all University of Minnesota students, faculty, and staff. And I like to point out, this is the last 60 days. And I have to use the last 60 days because if we try to show a longer time period, it breaks Arcgis Online. The amount of content that the university is creating, our colleagues, is really beyond what we're seeing in other higher education institutions and beyond a lot of other industries that are using it. All right, so I wanted to try, and I'm really scared to try this live demo again, but let's give it a shot, of how you can use ArcGIS Online. And this is primarily for University of Minnesota students, faculty, and staff at this point. I will say if you're at another higher education institution or K through 12, you have free access to these resources. They have great resources for nonprofit institutions, as well as government resources. This is a ubiquitous tool. It's out there. You will get access to it. There are also open source options available for people who are looking to just make maps. For University of Minnesota people, if you go to this website, umn.maps.arcgis.com, and hit sign in, you will use your UMN Internet ID, right? You're going to get your normal university screen. And of course, I get my Duo. And you are into ArcGIS Online. And you can go right to the map and start adding data to this. So I thought I'd try something. Again, a little bit nervous doing a live demo here with the way it started, but let's give it a shot. I'm going to add a layer from a file, import a layer. Oops. Choose a file. I just have a simple CSV file that has all the 5 campus locations. And so that's what it takes to add data. Maybe a little bit more work than that. But one type of data that you can add is CSV files. If you have address information on something, you're able to quickly add data to the map. Once we have that data on the map, we can start doing spatial analysis with it. So we can use the proximity of the campus and we can create drive time buffers around the campus locations. And for this example, I was going to try 15, 30, and 60. This is where it gets really scary and doing a live demo, but let's see what happens. And what it's doing, this is basic GIS. We're taking those points, these 5 points, and we're overlaying that on the roads network. It's available for the entire United States, as well as most of the world. And it's looking at, okay, if I'm driving the speed limit, how far can I get from the center of each campus? I say that a bit tongue in cheek in that it's a basic GIS function, and it is. It's just overlaying 2-layer data sets. For people who have been doing GIS for a while, this is an amazing resource, an amazing feature. This is work that probably would have taken myself 2 weeks, not much more than 5 years ago. And now I'm working in a web browser and just clicking away and adding drive time buffers, and it looks like it's coming back. And there we go. We've got our 30-minute, 60-minute, and 90-minute drive time buffer. We can do further analysis with that. We can do something that's called data enrichment. And so now that I've created these custom areas, I want to find out what the total population is, as well as the median household income for each of those areas. And run the analysis. And again, we're doing some simple GIS functions with an amazing data set that has the entire census data behind it, the entire American Community Survey data, proprietary data, proprietary business resources. If we wanted to know how many people were going to buy cell phones in each of these areas, we could start doing calculations like that. So it's doing this simple overlay. The little spinning circle there means it's doing some work for us, which we appreciate. While that's working away, I'm just going to go up to here. You can also look for existing layers. So something like the browsing the living atlas. We can look for unemployment. And here we have something from the Bureau of Labor Statistics updated 4/28, 2 days ago. Click and add that to my map. And there it is. Maybe we want to do a little bit of reordering here and bring Bureau of Labor Statistics down here on the bottom. Move our campus up to the top so we can see where our campus locations are. We can turn things on and off. So looking at different data sets, we're already starting to create a map where we can maybe be doing comparisons of data sets from different resources. That did come back. Let me just look really quick here, and I'm going to move off so we can get into that. So here's our locations. And if I scroll all the way to the right on this table, we can see the 2020 population and household if I click on the map. So that's for the outer ring of Rochester. And so the 30 to 60 minutes, there's 64,000, almost 65,000 people, median household income. I'm running through this really, really fast, right? But I just wanted to show there's some amazing data resources that are available for people to use to create maps and do research. I'll go back really quick. All you have to do is save this map. Demo. And I can click share, make it available to everyone. Oops. Update sharing. See, done. Just chatted out the link so you can see the map that I've created here in the last 5 minutes. Amazing resources. Again, lots and lots of fun with that. We can help. That's what U-Spatial does. That's our mission, is to work with people who are working with geospatial activities. We offer workshops. Jeff has mentioned that. We have one called Mapping 101, Storymaps 101. They've been online during COVID, hoping that we can get back into person in the fall semester or beyond. Those are available to all students, faculty, and staff, as well as people outside the university. We have a help desk, uspatial@umn.edu. If you have any questions at all, contact the help desk. We do consulting. We work with a lot of different research projects, providing the geospatial mapping expertise. Teaching with Storymaps. I'm going to go to the next slide to look at that. And I was going to just highlight one other program that's just gotten started, this Spatial Skills Badge. targeted towards grad students. If you take a couple of the workshops, the introductory mapping and the Storymaps 101, you can get one of these digital badges with story mapping. And it goes a long ways to making story maps, to thinking about a new way for presenting your research, right? It's a great way to put information and data out there. Our website, my email address, just so if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to get you connected with folks. This website, storymaps.umn.edu. There's a link for instructors. There's a link for students. Getting spatial thinking into the classroom. This is a great starting point for doing that. There are instructors who are using story maps now in place of some written assignments, and they work quite well. I need to promote one last thing, the U-Spatial Mapping Prize. Deadline is May 14th. This is for University of Minnesota students. This is our 7th year of doing this. The funding for this comes from Jack Dangerman, the founder of Esri. And it's a way for people to show off the great maps and the stories that they're telling using geospatial maps and story maps. There is a cartography category. So if you can make a beautiful map, that's great. I can't do that. But there's also categories for most transformative, most informative, most provocative. What can you do with the story map? Check out the website, see some examples from previous years. Actually, a lot of those examples that I scrolled through in the gallery were previous story map winners. There's real money. It's $1,000 for the first prize and then several other categories below that. So May 14th, students, it's coming up really soon. All campuses, make sure that I get that out there. And that's it. I am done. Thank you.
Len, thank you so much. Really appreciate you sharing this information. And as we all have heard, we have a great deal of amazing place-based work happening at the university, and mapping is just one tool that we can use to tell a story or advance the work we're doing. And we have some time right now to answer questions. So first, let me ask Amber and Kate if there's been any questions in the chat that we should direct to specific presenters.
The only questions so far coming in have been about if this information will be posted online, the webinar. And yes, our intention is that we are recording it and we will post it early next week on the Office for Public Engagement web site. But if you have other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Great, question came in, Mary. How do you utilize the asset map?
Okay, let's turn that question to Jeff Matson. How do we utilize an asset map?
So the impetus for this map, this one came out of the Preservation Alliance of Minnesota. They contacted us and were interested in basically just sharing the resources of a number of different neighborhoods throughout the Twin Cities. And as I think you mentioned, Mary, at the end of the presentation, it can be used to change the perception of what a neighborhood is. It can be used to highlight unknown and undiscovered places and features within an area. It's really up to the community how they want to use these. We're working on another one right now in partnership with UROC up in North Minneapolis that's centered around north side assets and with a particular focus on food systems, where food is available, where it isn't, where urban gardens are starting to spring up, a number of different things related to how people acquire and access food on the north side. And so there's another important example of something that's got some real world implications for people. The hardest part with these things is always getting the word out and then keeping them updated and refreshing them a lot enough. Even looking at that Cedar Riverside map, there are many businesses that have closed since this was created, and so that's another important aspect, is you need someone willing to put in the work to keep these fresh. So hope that kind of answered your question.
Yeah, life changes rapidly. Other questions from folks?
Another question I have is, what is your advice from all the panelists on some of the hiccups or stumbling blocks that people encounter when trying to start doing this type of work? What are things to watch out for or to avoid, or steps to take to try to make this tool as easy as possible to use?
Okay, maybe we'll start with Len for that one.
Sure, thank you. Great question. Break it into little pieces, right? It's an iterative process, I think, in all map making. It's finding the data. That's, I think, the hardest part of creating the map, especially if you're working with a very small area. If you can make a project that's thinking more in a state or county or global or nation scale, you're going to find more data resources to start from. That said, you can also go out and collect your own data. You can use smartphone tools that work really well for collecting data. Ask for help. The help desk is here to work with you. We are, centrally funded service. We love working with people as they start working with the technologies. And the last thing I'll just say is dive in. You can't break the software. Give it a try. Have fun with it.
I can add to that too. Just to say that as you're getting started, definitely ask for help. It's one of those, even within the libraries, we do a lot of projects with place related data in our collections. And before putting it on the map, you have to build the database that goes behind it, and which, it's more of a meeting with someone who knows the capabilities of the technology from the outset. Will save you time over time, because you can articulate what you want the output to look like, and then whoever, whether it's the libraries or U-Spatial, whoever's helping you with it, they can help you figure out what data you need to capture the first time through, so you're not going back and adding more. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, and having been a juror on the mapping prize for the last few years, I think also don't put too much on your map. I mean, think about what's the story you're trying to tell with your map, and only so edit back things that really don't add to that story, because too much information is as bad as too little. And then also think about the juxtapositions that really make a difference. I mean, the power of this tool is to really reveal things that aren't really apparent to us, and so think about the power of what you're linking and overlaying.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have another question. What are some of the strategies for engaging people with lived experiences and from the communities in many of the disparities you discussed? Maybe let's start with Tasoulla. Tasoulla, what are some of the strategies for engaging people with lived experiences from the communities in which have the disparities you discussed?
So different projects require different forms of engagement. When I started, I was actually going into people's houses and connecting with them that way. So that meant one family at a time. Then I switched to more of a focus group type of setting, connected with organizations working in different communities. So that's a different kind of a skill again. And then in Landscapes of Hope, because everything was remote, I was emailing and calling organizations and connecting with them that way. So it depends on what you're trying to do and how you're trying to set up a project. Like, what questions are you asking? And then how is the community going to be part of that generation process? And I would say it's not a clear answer, I think, because it varies so much depending on what you're up to and with which community you're working with, right? So every community takes building relationships, and that's why it's so important for us working with public engagement to revise tenure and promotion guidelines and performance evaluations and account for that relationship building time. Because it takes time to build relationships and it takes time to build trust. And we definitely don't want to continue along the line of work that we go out into the community and only for us to gain, right? So it needs to be a two-way street to build those relationships. And it's the same when we send students out, because in one of my classes, I send students out into the community as a way to expose them, because I believe that you don't have to get on a plane and cross the Atlantic or the Pacific to experience different ways of meaning making. All you have to do is go down Franklin or go down Lake Street, and you're gonna again find yourself in a totally different environment. So preparing the students to be able to engage as well, and how do they talk? How do they approach somebody?
Mhm.
I hope that helps. I hope it's not discouraging my response, but let me know if you have more questions.
Thanks, Tasoulla. Would anybody else like to add to that?
I can say a little bit. Ours, when just as part of the first part of the question, engaging with communities, and for us, yeah, it was really just going out and putting ourselves in front of people as much as possible. Our team over the course of the last 5 years has done over 300 presentations, and you know, a lot of them in the last year. We've done so many online. And just the ability to go out there, speak to people, and one presentation and one talk and really engage. One engagement often leads to another. And a lot of our presentations, you could trace a chain back through 5 or 6 presentations where someone saw us somewhere and wants to bring us into a different group. That, and I think just listening to, listening to all the to what the community is telling you, and really being able to go where whatever message you're carrying forward, go where that's needed, and how, and in a way that's helpful and described by the community.
I think another thing is that mapping can be a way to form community and to bring people together. A colleague of ours, Rebecca Krinke, does a lot of mapping of joy and pain in communities. And so she gets communities to sort of collectively map their feelings about the places that they're in. And so the process of mapping itself is a way to build community.
Mm.
And if you want to see Rebecca's large wooden map of the Twin Cities, it's in the map library once we reopen, hopefully in the fall.
Great. Amber, Kate, I'm not seeing any additional questions. Are you?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Well, we're almost at the end of our time here. And if there's no additional questions, I think we'll bring it to a close. And I just want to say thank you again to all of our presenters. And I hope that people feel, I mean, for me, I feel like what an amazing amount of work is happening at the university, and appreciate all of it. So thank you. Have a great Friday afternoon. I hope people are able to enjoy this sunshine.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary. Thank
Yep.
you, Amber.
All right, thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
All right. Bye now.